Now, language can be used to discriminate against African immigrants. That's according to research done by University of Cape Town lecturer Ivan Katsere. Called The Politics of Language, it's found that language has the potential to entrench a harmful us and them scenario. Katsere's work is focused on African immigrant families in South Africa. He examines how their identities are impacted as they move through informal spaces such as taxis and shops, as well as more formal spaces like hospitals and schools. Let's talk to Mr. Katsere now from our Cape Town studios. Ivan, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, your research is focused on Zimbabwean families living in South Africa. Why that community?
Thank you so much for having me. To get straight to your question, Zimbabwean families are the ones that I considered as the most vulnerable in my research. Now, it would have been easier to go and maybe research families who are from French-speaking nationalities. But I realized that when we look at South Africa, it's a nation that uses English as a lingua franca or an economic language. But ironically, in that situation, you realize that Zimbabweans who actually use English as a lingua franca are the ones who struggle the most to navigate social spaces, especially social spaces and other spaces. Now, this raised some curiosities in me to ask the question: why is it the people who seem to be most obviously not affected are the ones who are affected by situations of what has been come to be called xenophobia?
Now, going through some of your findings, you also state here that when a South African greets, or black South African greets a black immigrant, it's not just to say, hello, how are you? It's also basically asking, where are you from?
Yes. So in that, what I was trying to put across was the fact that, as Yuval Davis puts it, language does the dirty work of actually creating and maintaining boundaries. Now, as humans, we naturally create us and them when we interact with people, and language is the key to actually doing this. So when you say hi to someone in most spaces, especially in local languages, what someone is trying to do in that moment is trying to identify you. Identifying someone and actually identifying yourself with a social group is something that we actually associate with a sense of pride. I identify as Zimbabwean, I identify as Shona. I have a sense of pride in that. But in doing that as well, there's something that I do unconsciously. I create other groups which are not contained as Shona or Zimbabwean, right? Which is very normal and very acceptable in navigating social spaces. But what happens now is, in some cases, and in a lot of cases, what language has been doing in South Africa, especially local languages, is being used to actually create boundaries of us versus the them who are discriminated against. And in most cases, I found that the them actually the people who occupy black bodies.
Okay. You spoke to a lot of, or you interviewed a lot of people, and some of them were giving examples of incidents in hospitals, at police station, and so forth. Give us a couple of examples, and what were they saying would happen when they enter hospitals and police stations?
Yeah. So just to give a bit more context on that, what happens? Occupying a black body actually comes with some potential vulnerabilities that come with it in South African social spaces, right? So in Zimbabweans mainly that I spoke to, I realized that their home was the safe space that they realized, right? And once they walk out of their homes, every space that they occupy becomes a potentially violent space. What I mean by that is that there's potential for being attacked once they're identified as Zimbabwean or black Africans. And how they navigate those spaces in most cases, and in my research specifically, is using their children who serve as language brokers. Language brokers are children who translate and mediate for their parents in all the spaces. So when they get out of their homes, there is a potential, for example, if they are entering into the streets, there's a potential for being identified as Zimbabweans or as black Africans by the police. What happens once they are identified? There's potential for being violated by being asked, for example, if you have if you have a permit or if you belong in the space, so to speak, right? What is important for me in navigating those spaces is not the fact that they are being asked for identification, but the fact that mostly in most cases this actually applies mostly to black immigrants and is not the same situation with other immigrants who are viewed less with the discourse of being foreigners. So these spaces that they navigate include social spaces like being in a taxi, which is a space that has been identified as one of the most violent spaces by the people that I spoke to. And their children are the ones who actually speak for them in these spaces. So a simple request by a driver to actually potentially say, I want change, or I want to any form of communication with the driver. The child immediately speaks for the parent, right? The child is shielding their parent from an immediate sort of violation that they have identified through occupying these spaces. And it doesn't stop there. When they get out of the taxi and get into hospitals, for example, a lot of them actually verbalize how they do not go to hospitals alone, because once they are identified as using English, they do not receive services. One of the examples that I have was of a lady who spoke to me about a situation when she was in a hospital and she was in labor. But the nurse actually said to her that she won't help someone who doesn't speak her language, which is a local language, because the lady was using English.
All right,
Only
Ivan,
when a doctor
there.
who was using English.
Ivan, I'm going to just have to stop you there. Thank you so much. I think you've made your point clearly there.